All right, here we go, guys. Shabbat Shalom, my brother Doug. I'm with my mom, Sister Sharon today, with Sister Marissa, Brother Dennis, Brother Yahusha. Today we are going to be doing, I don't know how far we're going to get, but we're going to at least get into this whole Aluah versus Alahym debate. And basically, just to give you guys a background, this argument comes from the idea that just because the Dead Sea Scrolls mainly use Alahym, that we should use Alahym in the places that they use Alahym, and that Aluah is not that we're adding or taking away from Scripture if we pronounce it as Aluah rather than Alahym. It's if it's physically in a manuscript. So first of all, we gotta kind of go through the history of these different texts and understand that there was different textual traditions. What I mean by that is there wasn't one language of the scriptures. Yahuwah doesn't work that way. All right, so due to certain heretical sects among us, like promote the truth, they tend to deny Yahusha's sonship. People are getting the idea that all oneness people deny Yahusha's sonship. So basically, the idea that okay, because we believe Yahusha's Yahuwah, somehow that's denying him from being the only begotten. Which again, all you have to do is go to the word only begotten son and look at the actual meaning in the Greek, and you can show that it's actually one and the same. If you identify Yahusha as a version of Yahuwah that was sent to earth to be able to dwell with his righteous creation, that is a literally exactly what the only begotten son means. Like if you go into like a Strong's concordance or whatever and you look at the phrase only begotten son, to the Hebrews, son meant more than just okay, a child of yours. Okay, because if that's the case, you might as well equate Yahusha. If we're wrong and it just means he's just a son of the Father, then you might as well equate him with an angel.
That's right.
You might as well do that because there's only two types of beings in heaven. You got the creator and his creation, the angels or the messengers. That's it. There's no one else in heaven right now. So meaning that you only got two choices. Either he's one with the Father physically as one person, or he's a lesser being who's a messenger. And so in John 1:18 here, if you actually go to the Greek, only begotten, what it means, okay, in the actual Greek, monogenes, only born, that is soul. So it's something special. He's the soul, the only soul type of son, only begotten. And you go into the root word, okay, it's a special type of son. It's not a regular type of son. Okay, so single of its kind, the Thayers say. Okay, so again, when you understand that and you understand it from a Hebrew lens, like let's go to the Aramaic even here. Instead of son, it says Aluah or Alahym. No man has seen Aluah at any time, but the only begotten Aluah who is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him. So it's calling Yahusha Aluah. Okay? The only begotten Aluah, not just a regular son like a human son. So again, we have to understand that in the context of that. So first of all, anyone accuses you of that, they're wrong. They don't know what only begotten means. Number one, they're in error. Okay? We do not promote such false ministries like promote the truth or their beliefs. Just FYI, okay? So there is a false accusation of adding to scripture by using Aluah over Alahym. Issue that is there's more evidence for Aluah over Alahym and Aluah interchangeably when looking at the majority of manuscripts. The fact we have zero originals of any manuscript. Also, Dead Sea Scrolls and Masoretic, regardless of revisionist history, is not a original manuscript, meaning that the Dead Sea Scrolls is not the original Hebrew scriptures. The Masoretic text is not the original Hebrew scriptures, okay? So anyone that tries to tell you that, you say, okay, but where is the original even of those type of manuscripts? The Dead Sea Scrolls only goes back to 100 BC. The Septuagint's 200 years older than the Dead Sea Scrolls for most of the scrolls, and sometimes even older. Some of the scrolls go to 100 AD. Go ahead, brother.
Sorry, I'll come back around.
Okay. The Masoretic, my next point, the Masoretic and Dead Sea Scrolls predominantly use Alahym, but do in certain books and certain places they do have Aluah there. Oh, go ahead, brother. I don't know if that's the old hand or the new.
A new hand. I was going to say, and you can't just take a corrupted manuscript and take the Hebrew and turn the Hebrew into pictographic Hebrew and then say that you're pulling from the original manuscript. I can't take something corrupted and just change the language and then expect it to not be uncorrupted, or
Yeah.
anyone that might believe
Yeah.
that, as I know that there are definitely some out there that believe that.
Yeah, because then you're being a revisionist in history. Because we know through history, the Masoretes themselves, and if you want the quotes, I can get you the quotes. They said themselves in their own works, in their own personal books, that they did not have the original Hebrew text. They were working with whatever stream that was around 900 CE. Okay, so that would have been the Hebrew that Jerome would have had. That would have been the Hebrew that, from 100 AD to whatever, they would have had that. They would have not had, Masha's Torah that was written 1400 BC. Okay. The Septuagint would have had that. The original Septuagint authors would have had that, by the way. They would have had the original Tanakh, possibly. Okay. Like the actual Torah of Masha to translate from. So, again, that's why I hold the Septuagint such high regard. Okay. LXX shows Aluah for Yahuwah and plural Alahym for mighty ones of the nation. So there's two Greek words that the Septuagint uses that would be translated in Hebrew. The title they use for Yahuwah when it's talking about Yahuwah would be Aluah, because it's a singular Greek word, and it's a plural Greek for the gods of the nations. And this is very common in Greek and Aramaic manuscripts. So this is something that the earlier would have shown. Yes, when you're talking about the idols of the nations, they would have been Alahym. But when you're talking about the sole creator, singular, it would be Aluah. It just makes sense. Okay. The Vulgate, which, by the way, would have used a Hebrew text much earlier than the Masoretic, okay, because the Vulgate was around 300 AD about. Okay, so the Vulgate would have used a Hebrew text supposedly like just a little bit newer than the Greek Septuagint. So a Hebrew text that would not be as old as the Septuagint. So maybe like first century BC is what the Vulgate used. Okay, so the Vulgate uses Aluah and Alahym at both for Deus Latin. So again, there's evidence for both versions in the Vulgate. Targums and Peshitta predominantly use Aluah instead of Alahym. So again, the Targums orally would have been passed down, some believe, even as early as when they came back from Babylon. So the Targums orally started in the period of them preaching from the podium. You had a meturgeman, interpreter of the law, that would orally speak it out in Aramaic, from Hebrew into Aramaic. So you already had evidence of that in the Targums, where Aluah is used much more frequently than Alahym. Okay, and same thing with the Peshitta. The Peshitta would have been first century AD. So again, there's evidence for both throughout history. Samaritan Pentateuch as well predominantly uses Aluah instead of Alahym. Samaritan Pentateuch, you can look it up for yourself. They used a late Paleo Proto-Masoretic Hebrew script, meaning before. So they would have used a like very late Paleo Hebrew script, probably similar to the Phoenician language. So again, they're using actual Hebrew type of script for their manuscript. Okay, and they have Aluah universally over Alahym. Okay, and some people will even put the Samaritan Pentateuch as late as 100 BC or even as early as 5 or 600, depending on who you talk to. So anyway, the argument people use is there is not enough evidence to use Aluah over Alahym because they favor or idolize Hebrew. This is due to multiple factors. People only want to trust Hebrew because the original scriptures were written in Hebrew. They distrust versions. No, and they distrust in other versions, other languages, I should say. They also seem to have a non-oneness bias, pre-non-oneness bias, so a pre-bias of that they don't want to accept the oneness and falsely claim we use Aluah to promote oneness, which I can assure you I use interchangeably both, and I believe in the oneness. So I don't get hung up on Alahym that it's somehow polytheistic. If you understand even modern Hebrew, there's something called majestic plural. There's things in language called that. There's things that are in the Hebrew language itself that shows you can have a plurality in verbiage, but it doesn't mean there's multiple people. Okay. Go ahead, brother.
Just touching on the things that people are claiming that, we're not doing. There's also been the claim that, we misunderstand the verse in Corinthians, where we say that no man can call on Yahusha, or no man can say that Yahusha is Yahuwah except the Ruach Hadash. But clearly, like if you look in the Aramaic, that's what it says. No man can say Marya or Yahusha is Marya or Master Yahuwah. Now, I mean, I guess you could say that, there is the debate that Marya can only mean master, and the other side does present their, a good argument. And I don't speak Aramaic, but I would say that the favor leans more in line with Marya, meaning Master Yahuwah. So it's not that we're twisting scripture in any way, it's that's how we read it as. That's what it says.
Yeah. And even if you look at the Greek, I can make the argument kurios doesn't always just mean master. Okay. For people, and I'm not talking about anyone here, but people that want to say, "Oh, Doug, kurios just means Lord or Master." Oh, really? Let's go to Romans 10 here. So you're going to tell me where Paul's quoting from that it should just say Lord, okay? And this is the same word that's used in 1 Corinthians 12, by the way, in the Greek, okay? So let me see here where it talks about those that call upon the name of Yahuwah shall be saved, okay? Right here. And some actual, I'm going to save this screenshot here because some translators actually know this and have Lord in all caps, okay? They actually understand this. So there's also false understandings on kurios as well. So in the Greek here, it would say, whosoever shall call upon the name of, if you got all caps there, should be Yahuwah, okay? For whosoever shall call upon the name of kurios, Yahuwah, shall be saved. Okay. Now, the reason I know it's supposed to be Yahuwah, the quote is from Joel. Okay. Joel in the Hebrew has Yahuwah there, where kurios is. What people got to understand is kurios was not just Lord. It is actually a word, a substitution that later versions of the LXX input for Yahuwah, and Greek New Testament substituted Yahuwah's name multiple times. That's why I really suggest people get the ABP, the Apostolic Bible Polyglot, because it will a lot of the times put Lord in all caps where Yahuwah is supposed to be. So again, most translators understand this. So I don't believe we're making up our own interpretation then. If most people that are making these Bibles even understand this, this is not us putting our own interpretation there. This is clearly in the text. People have been taught to eisegetically look at kurios as Lord every time. That's the problem. I would say those that say Lord, that kurios is Lord every time, is they're putting their own interpretation. because it's very clear Kyrios in the Septuagint is used for Yahuwah thousands of times. So, I mean, there's proof there. Trust me, there's proof. So, and again, the Aramaic, to brother's point, the master Yahuwah, okay? Mara Yah, okay? So, for everyone who shall call upon the name of Mara Yah shall be saved. The master Yahuwah shall be saved. So again, if you compare the Aramaic to the Greek, it's that we have misunderstood Kyrios as only Lord, okay? Kyrios is not Lord by itself, okay? And it's only Lord by itself when it's talking about humans. The only time you can say it just means Lord is when it's talking about a human in the context, okay? If it's talking about Yahuwah, it's referring to Yahuwah and his name, okay? It was clearly, you can look at this up in Encyclopedia Britannica, by the way. Very easy to look this stuff up. Very easy, okay? What Kyrios was used as when like the modern versions of the LXX came out, because originally the LXX had the Paleo Hebrew of Yahuwah, fragments we still have today of the original LXX. They kept Yahuwah in Paleo Hebrew and translated the rest of the verse in Greek. So what happened later on, probably when the Catholic Church got hold of the Septuagint, they started making their own copies, and they probably, with the rabbinical influence, especially with Jerome being influenced by a lot of rabbis at the time, they started making new copies of the Septuagint and putting Kyrios there instead of Yahuwah. That's what probably happened, okay, realistically. So again, Kyrios doesn't always mean Lord. When people say that, I would ask them, okay, prove that. Because the Strong's Concordance doesn't show that. Any like legitimate dictionary or lexicon will tell you it's sometimes, just like Adonai, it's sometimes a replacement for the Tetragrammaton. So that's a clear historical fact, okay? So that's not us putting our own opinion forth. Anyway, so according to various historical quotes, Dead Sea Scrolls and whatever the Masoretes used from about 160 AD on would have significant changes to the text that were intentional. In conclusion, any argument that you're adding to the word because you vocalize Aluah when a modern manuscript says Alahym can't be valid because we don't know what the original said. It's that simple. You don't know what the original said. And anyone that claims that they said that Dead Sea Scrolls reflects the original, I'm sorry, but you need to do more research. No one claims the Dead Sea Scrolls come from the original. No one claims that. Just because they're Hebrew doesn't mean they come from the original. Okay, that is a lack of understanding of history. Okay. Anyway, textual variances make it impossible to accuse any violation of Deuteronomy 4:2 verbally unless you are adding to Yahuwah's law or verbalizing something that is found in none of the manuscripts. Furthermore, it's impossible originals in certain it's impossible originals in certain places. Furthermore, it's impossible originals in certain places never had Aluah or Alahym at all, but had Yahuwah. So I personally believe, if we're talking about the original scriptures, as far as a name, they probably never had Yahuwah. I mean, never had Aluah or Alahym. They had Yahuwah. Why I believe that? If you look at the Targums, okay, all of Genesis 1 in the Targum Onkelos says Yahuwah almost every time in the whole chapter of chapter 1. Okay. Certain verses in Psalms in the Targums have Yahuwah instead of Alahym. Historically, the Masoretes started substituting the vowel points with Alahym, where the text says Yahuwah. So originally, guys, this was a vocal thing. The Hebrew text would say Yahuwah, but they put dots and dashes there to vocalize Adonai or Elohim. Okay, that's a historical fact. Okay, so the Masoretes, before they even made their physical manuscript, were already vocalizing this rabbinical tradition of never using Yahuwah's name. Okay, so they're to pronounce Alahym or Adonai instead of Yahuwah. The Aramaic version of Job uses Aluah. in the Masoretic text, where in the LXX it indicates the original Job would have said Yahuwah by having kurios. Okay? Again, another proof that kurios can be a substitution for Yahuwah and doesn't just mean master. Okay? Further research, the plural form Alahym is the most common term for Aluah in the biblical manuscripts found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. However, the singular form Aluah, which is likely the source of the term you refer to as Aluah, is also found, though less frequently, often in poetic or specialized context. So again, the Google was even giving me these sources that basically it's not always Alahym. Okay. Both forms are found in the earliest biblical scrolls dating to some ancient period. Details on which is found and where. Okay, so age, okay, whatever. Alahym, plural form, but used with singular. Okay, so we know about all this. Okay, so oldest biblical scrolls, fragments of Genesis and Exodus dating back to the 3rd century BC, approximately 250 BCE, which again is not the original. That's around the time of the Septuagint, okay? So again, people saying, if anyone says to you, oh, the Dead Sea Scrolls are the original, no, they're not. No, they're not. Okay? They're actually a little less old. They're actually a little bit like 50 years about newer than the Septuagint. So again, that's not proof. Aluah singular form found, but less frequently, primarily in the book of Job. Scrolls contain, okay. And we already talked. Now, interesting too in the Masoretic, which I think is a corruption, in my opinion, they have the singular form al, just el or al, which I think they started getting into Canaanite god worship, I believe is what happened. Because you don't see that ever in the Septuagint where theos would be like shortened to 2 letters. You don't see that ever. Okay. And you don't see that in other texts. You don't see that. I don't think you see that in the Targums or the Peshitta either. Like al or el, you don't see that. Okay. That's strictly from the Masoretic for the most part. Now they claim that supposedly that el would have been in 2nd to 3rd century BC. I would like to check that for myself. I personally, I doubt that. Key scrolls that use these terms, scrolls used Alahym consistently. Okay, we already talked about that. Yada yada yada. Okay, and then I put up here. Okay, here's another proof that I believe with textual variances you can't be a stickler on stuff like this. Okay, here's another example. Genesis 1:27 instead of Alahym, instead of it saying Elohim or Alahym made man in his image, Genesis 1:27 says Dabar Yahuwah, or the word of Yahuwah, made man in his image. So you have variances in manuscripts of names and titles that they used. So you can't be a stickler and say it has to be Elohim, Alahym, or it has to be Aluah, or it has to be this. When you got variances of different manuscripts, okay? So the Great Isaiah Scroll dated from circa 120 BC. Now, a lot of people love to use the Great Isaiah Scroll. Noted it is 200 years newer than the Isaiah in the Septuagint. 120 BC, that's 1st century. You're almost at 1st century BC at that point, okay? So one of the oldest scrolls in the Dead Sea Scrolls doesn't even go back to the time of the Septuagint. So just to give you some context there, okay? This complete biblical book uses Alahym as the standard term for God in many passages. Okay, yada, yada, yada. Aluah, 2nd to 1st century. So they do admit that some scrolls have Aluah in the Dead Sea Scrolls that date to almost the same time period, 2nd to 1st century. Aluah is most prominent in the book of Job, and it's a highly poetic text. The scrolls contain Job, like 4th Qumran Job would also date back with overall Dead Sea Scroll time period, 2nd to 1st centuries BC. So all this said, guys, if anyone says to you it has to be Alahym because of the Dead Sea Scrolls, number one, this is almost like the argument of evolution. They are not taking all the data. They're not using all the data. They're using like an isolated form of the data to promote a false doctrine. Usually when people put false accusations against you, it's because they're guilty of it themselves and they're deflecting. Okay? Usually. I'm not saying every time, but usually. Okay? Clearly you can see here just from what I spouted out in these bullet points of history here. Okay? You can test it for yourself. Go to every verse that they would bring up that's in the Dead Sea Scrolls and then go to other manuscripts. Okay, it would be one thing if every single manuscript showed that it should be Alahym. We would have to repent, but that's not the case. It's just not the case. There's not enough evidence for that. Okay, and again, I don't need to make it Aluah to prove the oneness. Okay, I don't need to make it either way because again, I understand that plurality in the Hebrew language does not mean that there's multiple beings being talked about. Okay, plurality in the Hebrew language is just a plurality. It has nothing to do whether there's multiple beings or not. This is the type of argument that you see stupid people like Billy Carson make. Oh well, it's it's Elohim, it's plural, it must be gods. It's like let's not be like the New Agers, guys. Let's not be like the New Agers, okay? Let's not eisegetically interpret the scriptures, okay? Let's not put our own interpretation into the text. The Hebrew language is not the same thing as the English language. You can't put English language rules into the Hebrew language, okay? The Hebrew will have plurality sometimes where it's one person talking or where it's just denoting a plurality within the Almighty, that you have two personalities in one person. Okay, so you have the Father talking to the Son. Hey, let's make man in our image. Okay, and that's how they always understood it until rabbinical Judaism came along. Okay, they always understood it that there was two roles in the Most High. You had the Father, you had the Son. They were talking to one another, and it goes from singular to plural, like back to back in those verses. Go ahead, brother.
We can even see this with Yahusha, even if you just take Yahuwah and put the role of Yahuwah off to the side. Even with Yahusha himself, he spoke in different roles. The verse that I sent you the other day that was saying that he will not he has not come to judge the world. There will be one that judges in the time, in that time when it's time to judge. The very same words that he spoke, these will be the ones that judge. But he is the word, and he also said that he speaks nothing of himself. Everything that he speaks only what Yahuwah has given. And so if his words are going to be what judges, then he's saying Yahuwah's words will be what judges. And what is Yahuwah's word if not Yahusha? So you have Yahusha saying that he won't judge, but that he will judge. So you have the role of Yahusha when he came to earth, where he's not standing in judgment against man, right? He's coming to deliver man. And then you have the role of Yahusha that he's talking about, where he will judge as the word of Yahuwah. So even you have him even going back and forth between two different roles, even outside of him, being Yahuwah.
True. Yeah, I mean, there's and even in the Targums it shows this too. Sometimes it will say, "You have not obeyed the command of Dabar or Memra Yahuwah your Alahym." So it's showing that the command came forth from the Word, who's a person. So there was always two roles. This is how this is the basic way I can explain this to people. If you research it for yourself, what is the Second Temple time period understanding about the word of Yahuwah and Yahuwah? They had the word of Yahuwah was like this vice regent version of the Father that would do the Father's will, that would be on earth cohabitating righteously. Command the Torah, bring the Torah. Okay, so, and let me see here. I'm going to use a little bit of just commentary here from a guy that has actually researched into this, okay, to help you understand this, guys. Just like we know every ancient belief system believed in flat Earth, right? Just like we know every ancient belief system believed in what's called the Heavenly Council, or the Christians called the Divine Council. There was a side belief within the council, Heavenly Council idea of you had this vice regent version of the Most High that would go on Earth, do Yahuwah's bidding. Like for example, right, Exodus 15. Yahuwah is a man of war. Yahusha is the Yahuwah who is a man of war. He's the one making war, while Yahuwah's up there on his throne in heaven. Two places at once. Go ahead, brother.
I'm so glad you brought that verse up. That goes into what I was saying earlier to your mom, like the verse that people use that you can only find it worded in the Masoretic. But even if we didn't have the Septuagint, like the verse where people say that use where it says Yahuwah is in the Masoretic, it would read Yahuwah is not a man that he should lie, right? But the Septuagint is not as a man that he should lie. Even if it did say Yahuwah is not a man that he should lie, it's clearly not saying that he would never come as a man. If it says also in the same scriptures, Yahuwah is a man of war. So is he a man or is he not a man?
Yeah. And just to read a little excerpt here, this is Michael Heiser's commentary on the book by Stephen Siegel, Two Powers in Heaven. 25 years ago, rabbinical scholar Alan Siegel, by the way, a rabbinical Jew, okay, he doesn't believe in Yahusha, so he doesn't have a bias, okay, what is still the major work on an idea of powers, the two powers in heaven in Jewish thought, or Yahudim thought. Siegel argued that the two powers idea was not deemed heretical in Jewish theology until 200 CE. He carefully traced the roots of the teaching back into the Second Temple era. That would have been as late as 200 BC. Siegel was able to establish the ideas antecedents were in the Hebrew Bible, specifically passages like Daniel 7:9. You know, the Son of Man comes to the Ancient of Days. Exodus 23:20-23. I send my messenger, my name is on him. Yahusha comes in the Father's name. Yeah. Okay, so Exodus 23:20-23 is actually Yahusha he's talking about. Okay, Exodus 15:3 talking about Yahuwah is a man of war. Okay, all of these basically point to what they called in the 600 BC to 200 BC time period as the two powers in heaven. Not that there were two gods. I want to make clear that's not what it's saying. Okay, the two powers in heaven were basically what we're talking about. Two roles, one deity. Right. Two roles, one mighty one. And so Siegel argued against his own Jewish comrades that basically this idea was not heretical until the AD time period. So for 600 years, they understood this. Even the Yahudim understood this. So my own work bridges the gap. This is Michael Heiser talking. In the Hebrew Bible, understood in the Canaanite religious context, meaning that it's not only the Hebrews that believe this. The paradigm of the high sovereign Aluah, or Al, who rules heaven and earth through the agency of a second appointed version of himself, became part of the Israelite religion, albeit with some modification for Orthodox Israelite. Yahuwah was both sovereign and vice-regent, occupying both slots or roles, as it were, at the head of the divine council. Now, I would not call it binitarian. That's his own words. I would say instead of binitarian, I would argue it's oneness. The oneness portrayal of Yahuwah in the Hebrew Bible was motivated by this belief. The ancient Israelites knew that they knew two personifications of Yahuwah. So to like an atheist or to a modern Jew today, they would accuse us of polytheism. Yeah. Because they would see two Yahuwahs. Okay, so that's why we get accused of stuff like this, not realizing that this was the original Israelite view. Okay, they knew two Yahuwahs, one visible, one spirit. Okay, one in human form, one in spirit form, and at times appeared together in the text. You know, John 1:1, the word was with Yahuwah, next to Yahuwah, and the word was Yahuwah. Okay, at times being distinguished, at other times not. And we see that all throughout the Tanakh and Brit Hadashah. You can't deny it. There's times where it looks like Yahuwah is separate from the word of Yahuwah, and there's times where they're one entity. So that's what he's talking about here. This is not a trinity. This is a oneness. Okay. Early Judaism understood this portrayal of its rationale. There was no sense of violation of monotheism, since either figure was indeed fully Yahuwah. There was no second distinct God running the affairs of the cosmos. So I want to make that clear. This is a monotheistic belief system. During the Second Temple period, Jewish theologians and writers speculated on the identity because, Yahusha didn't come yet. Okay, so they speculated on who the identity of the second Yahuwah was. Some would say a messenger, like a regular messenger, or a divine being, that a mortal being that was somehow divine. These speculations were not considered unorthodox. That acceptance changed when the Jews and the early Christians connected Yahusha with this Orthodox Yahudim idea. This explains why these Yahudim, the first converts to following Yahusha Messiah, or these Yahudim that were the first converts of Yahusha, could simultaneously worship the Aluah of Yashrael and Yahusha, because Yahusha was the Aluah of Yashrael. That's why. And yet refuse the acknowledgement of any other God. Yahusha was the incarnate second form of Yahuwah, meaning he was the second role. He was the version of Yahuwah that was the Ben, the only begotten, incarnate form, in human form. So anyway, hopefully you guys can understand that a little better, explaining the history of this belief system. Okay, so I really recommend people actually look into, to understand this view, you really have to at least give the Targums a chance and the Aramaic Peshitta a chance, and you have to look into historically what they believed in. I'll leave the link for you guys to look into. Again, we're not talking about binitarianism. We're not talking about Trinitarianism. We're talking about one singular Alahym in two roles. Okay, so Yahusha was the second power, the second role in human form. That's who he claimed to be all the time. He said, before Abraham was I am, all throughout John, all through Paul's epistles. Okay, this is very clear what the New Testament teaches. So what this book is about, why this is such an important book, is this is a rabbinical Orthodox scholar, Orthodox rabbinical Jewish scholar, admitting that this oneness belief was with the original Yahudim. This was not something new. This was John was talking to his own, speaking like this in John 1:1. Okay, so he was preaching this. He was preaching the oneness belief to his own people. Okay.
You can go back to King David.
Yeah.
Yahusha
was the second incarnate version of the Almighty. In response, as Siegel's work demonstrated, Judaism pronounced the two powers teaching a heresy sometime in 200 AD. So basically 200 AD would have been the last time they would have believed in the oneness or any type of thing close to the oneness, and then they just got rid of it. And then that's probably where you get the whole stupid, what's his name in Kabbalism, the stupid Metatron. That's probably when you would have got Metatron and the idea that Metatron is the second Yahuwah and Metatron is the lesser Yahuwah. That didn't happen probably until the 200 AD time period. So this is something. This is what Christianity would call the original Orthodox view of the Israelites. So yeah, so there's a lot of sources he cites here. There's a book someone wrote called The Gospel of the Memra. Memra is Aramaic for word, like the word of Yahuwah. Two powers in heaven. That's cited here. The Image of the Invisible Alahym is another book written in 1995. The Pre-Existent Son was written by Cather Cole Simon, and seems like another Jewish person. So there's a lot of people that are starting to come out of Judaism and starting to realize what their spiritual forefathers of their own religion believed, and what the original rabbis believed versus what they believe now. So let's see here. But there's tons of sources here. I would definitely recommend anyone that wants to look into this, feel free. I'll give you guys the link. But hopefully this explains things and shows that we have no bias here. We are giving you guys scriptural facts, historical facts of the Second Temple time period. And that's just the way it went. So basically what people in this walk believe now, they would call that a late misunderstanding. The idea that the word of Yahuwah is a separate entity from Yahuwah completely, that he's not the Father at all, but he's a completely separate being, or that there's some mystical relationship that the Son of Yahuwah is supposed to be this mystical, like a mystical like type of father-son relationship, like that he's just a special son, but he's not the Father. That really doesn't come about, I hate to say, until the Middle Ages, guys. That belief system was never believed by the Hebrew people. And really, as far as it goes, in either you believed in the oneness like this and was a follower of Yahusha in the 1st century, or you just denied him. There was like no in between. There was no in between at all. The reason that Yahusha got put to the stake was because he claimed to be who he was. So when you look at the historical background of it, it makes sense. Now, I personally believe the devil put this deception in at some point to start separating the Father and the Son through Gnosticism, New Age, mysticism, Kabbalism, all those other false belief systems eventually got people spoiled through philosophy. And like brother research today found out for me, that supposedly the idea that Yahuwah could not leave his throne and become a man, that modern Judaism belief system was actually Hellenism. That comes from Hellenism, the Hellenistic time period. So that was very late itself. That would have been at the very end of the Second Temple time period. So again, you got to realize too that the devil's going to sow tares, okay? The devil's going to sow false doctrine as well.
Yeah, but
Just
brother,
like he's
didn't the Jews never believe in the resurrection?
that's a mix. The Sadducees never did. The Pharisees did. They just didn't, as a whole, accept Yahusha being the resurrected Savior. They believed in this Son of Man pre-existing character. I mean, it was in their literature. You had the Book of Enoch at that time. They definitely, a lot of what Yahusha said was because they wanted this Messiah character to basically be this conquering king at the first coming. So what Yahusha didn't qualify for them was their added prerequisite that he had to fulfill all the prophecies all at once. He had to be coming as a heavenly being, like a heavenly being on earth to destroy their enemies. That's what they wanted. So they wanted that son of Adam to come as the son of Adam, like the pre-existent, son of Adam in Enoch, to come and defeat their enemies right away. Yeah. So that's what was the problem. But they believed in the resurrection. A lot of the people at that time did. It was the Sadducees who didn't. Right. There was weird heretical sects like, the Ebionites, like we talked about earlier, and before them, the Essenes. I don't think they believed in the resurrection either. They were very weird. There were certain sects at Qumran that were very like anti-resurrection, anti-blood atonement. Definitely by the time after Qumran is, deserted by 70 AD, you already have the Ebionites who definitely were not big on blood atonement. Seems like they never believed in it. They don't believe Yahusha was to die for their sins. So even though they believed in Yahusha, they believed in another Yahusha. And similarly with the Pharisees, Yahusha wasn't the one they wanted. They selfishly wanted a conquering king, political leader, and they're going to get him. The synagogue of Satan is going to get him in the end times. They're going to get their little political leader that defeats all their enemies.
Like
but it's going to be
right? Like the new mayor of New York?
Yeah, I would say more specifically, the Antichrist. That's kind of what they want, is what they're going to get. That's everything that they want in a Messiah. The Antichrist is going to do. He's going to defeat their enemies in Daniel 10 it talks about. He's going to set up his tabernacle in the Holy Land. He's going to, do all these things that they want in their traditions. They want world peace. He'll give them a so-called world peace with his treaty in Daniel
Yeah.
No, but
9:24.
I believe that he's setting this up with the Muslims because the Muslims are taking over a lot of positions in government here in the U.S. And now with this Bandani guy being elected to mayor and Ilhan Oman being a senator, they're starting to put their seeds and plant their position here in America. And I believe that's what the enemy's doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. Well, again, it goes back to who do the Muslims come from? That, I mean, when you look at who the whore is, who do the Muslims come from? They're one of her daughters. So they're gonna want Islam as prominent, because then they can forcefully. I mean, supposedly the Pope's been wanting to take the Holy Land for a while, so he's probably they've been using Islam as a tool of the Vatican for a very long time. And anyone wants proof, I can give you proof. I found proof like a little while ago about there's a PDF I found on I think it's Alberto Rivera,
Oh.
or one of the other guys who was a former Jesuit, came up with basically exposed the Catholic Church as being the creator of Islam, the real creator of Islam, and how they've used Islam to try to take Jerusalem. And that's their ultimate plan. So I believe when the beast comes, he'll be in league with the Pope. He'll be in league with the Vatican. The radical Islam will be their tool, and all that's connected. Islam was one of her daughters. Just like all the Protestant churches are her daughters, Islam is her daughter too. And all of them are going to come back. All of them are going to come back to the mother harlot. So I believe that's all part of prophecy too. But yeah, basically who the Pharisees wanted, their descendants now, or even people that are not really Yahudim, that are trying to claim the Pharisees are their ancestors, are going to get the Messiah they want. But it's not going to be the true Messiah. It's going to be their little Kabbalistic Messiah. It's going to be their little, I forget, we even done a study about the whole Leviathan thing and how the Masoretes try to turn Leviathan into Satan and all that, and how they're I have to find that link again that talks about that. They, in Kabbalism, they have what's called the dragon Messiah. So they think their Messiah represents the dragon. So it's like they're outwardly telling you who they're the synagogue of. They're outwardly telling people, whether people are listening or not. Like, they've always been the synagogue of Satan, that religion. They always have been. So they're the Pharisees. They believed in the resurrection. They were waiting for the Son of Man to come. When the Son of Man came, he wasn't the Son of Man they wanted. And they killed him. And that's the reality. So the fact of the matter is that a lot of them had the Targums back then orally. This is why it's so important, I believe, to research into the Targums, even if you don't fully trust them, to look at what they believed back then. Because they don't believe that now. It's completely different. It's almost a whole different religion. It's
Yeah,
like
Brother Doug, as far as I can remember, I've always heard that the reason why they killed Yeshua was for political reasons, because the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes thought that he was trying to take away their power, just like it is today in the political field. They saw him as a political enemy, and that's one of the reasons why they thought they were getting rid of him. But it was all about politics.
No, that's not what the text says. The text says they were ready to stone him even before that. You as a man make yourself Yahuwah. Very clear. They're very clear in the New Testament what they were killing him for. They did not want him to be their Messiah. They did not want him to be the second version or the second role of the Almighty that they were waiting for. They believed in this stuff. They believed in the oneness, but they believed in someone who was not he did not fulfill their expectations of the Messiah was going to be. They did not want some lowly poor son of Miriam that had a carpenter stepdad and all that. They did not want him as the Son of Man character that they were waiting for.
They wanted a new David.
They wanted a new David. They wanted a new Solomon. They wanted this guy to have power right away, be a political man, be a man of politics, be a man who's killing all their enemies like the Romans. That's why you had the Zealots who were not for him either. And the Zealots wanted a Messiah that was going to, basically be anarchist. But no, the text is very clear in John. It's very clear that, once he says, I am my Father are one, they're ready to kill him.
Yeah, that's it.
They're ready to kill him.
Yeah.
And for people that say that that's him not saying that he's the Father, that they're just in unity, why would the Pharisees go to kill him after that?
Right.
Why would they pick up stones to stone him just from saying that? It makes no sense. The biggest problem too with this anti-oneness belief system, you have to reinterpret the whole New Testament in your own selfish, fleshy eyes. You can't let it say what it says. Because if you don't think he's claiming to be Yahuwah, what are you going to do with statements like before Abraham was I am? What are you going to do with statements like they pick up stones right after that too? Every time he equated himself with the Father, they wanted to stone him. They knew who he was claiming to be because, like I said, it was in their culture. This Second Temple belief system was. Yep. Go ahead.
To that point, the verse that says, "Have I?" He says, I think it was Thomas. He says, "Show us the Father, and it will be sufficient for us." Have I not been with you so long that you don't recognize me?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's right. That I and my Father are one. That's right. Don't you know that when you see me, you've seen the Father? Yep, that's right. That's exactly right. So it shows you that even the apostles were grappling with this. This is not an easy thing. And I believe very strongly that just as he removed the scales from their eyes and they became completely clear on it, I believe that those of us that are to understand and accept the oneness, that he wills us to do it, and he removes the scales from our eyes, and it's like all of a sudden you're seeing with new eyes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say other than that. People, and I mean this with the most kindness in my heart, they need to study history. They need to study what the original Hebrews believed, okay? Because it's not what we've been taught. It's not what Messianic Judaism is teaching you. If you're coming from a belief system that has anything to do with Judaism, you're not going to understand this topic. You need to renounce any type of teaching from Judaism that you might have had early on in this walk. You got to let it go. Because Judaism doesn't care about you being saved. They don't care.
No.
They don't care. You're their enemy. Why hold to something from Judaism? Why this whole idea of Yahuwah can't leave his throne is unscriptural. It's not biblical. So many of these ideas we're being taught are unbiblical. They're not anything like brother said earlier. No, you can't use numbers to discount Yahuwah becoming a man. Genesis 18, okay? He becomes a man. He walks with two messengers. Yahuwah is the one in the middle, and he's got two messengers, one on his right, one on his left. They walk up to Abraham. It says 3 men went to Abraham. Yahuwah is one of the men, meaning that he became a human. So you can't use numbers to discount Genesis, okay? And again, this is where context comes in. And this is why I believe it is a manuscript issue why people can't see this. It's a manuscript issue, especially in the New Testament. Most people that you talk to will use the ISR, or they'll use this manuscript and that manuscript that intentionally tries to change the readings in so many verses. Okay, I truly believe the devil used Westcott and Hort, these two men called Westcott and Hort, to deceive so many people. Because these two guys, if these guys never existed, you would not have a Westcott Hort text. You would not have no one would be using the Codex Sinaiticus New Testament, and you wouldn't have this problem. Because the fact of the matter is, before these modern versions came out that used the Westcott and Hort, in the early Middle Ages, all you had was one main Greek manuscript everyone used. And there was core doctrines in it that are important doctrines in those more accurate versions. Like, for example, 1 Timothy, I think it's 1 Timothy 3:16, if I'm not mistaken, or 2 Timothy, where it says, this is the good news. He talks about the mystery. Paul talks about the mystery. He says, Aluah was manifested in the flesh, meaning that the Father came as the Son in the flesh. He was preached by angels, you know, that verse. The Westcott Hort takes out Aluah and just puts he. So it completely changes the verse, makes you think, oh, well, that's just the Son, that's not the Father. It completely promotes Unitarian theology. And that's the problem, is that people are also trusting. Most people I talk to about this or see people post about their belief from their side is from like one version or one manuscript. There's no second witnesses. There's no third witnesses. It's like one main version of the Bible. And that's what I have a problem with, is people don't really want to research into this. People don't want to really look into this. If you're not looking into 3, 4, 5 different manuscripts, if you're not looking at least 2, 3 different Bibles, you're not really wanting to know the truth. That's the flesh. The flesh wants you to barely look into something and just make a decision on it. It's that simple. Because rarely have I seen anyone who is anti-oneness try to use the Septuagint, try to use the Aramaic New Testament, try to use the New Testament that the King James used, the Byzantine majority text, which is the way more accurate version in the Greek versions. They're never using the more accurate versions. They're using like watered down, and I love the ISR as much as the next guy, but the ISR really kind of screwed up. They kind of screwed up. They started using the Westcott Hort a lot in Paul's letters. That, to me, already, I can't use that as my main Bible if that's the case. If they're going to use corrupted manuscripts, and they even say in their own preface, we chose when to stop using the Textus Receptus or the Byzantine. So their own bias, because they have a bias, they wanted to use the Westcott Hort in Paul's letters. So to me, that's not going to be my main scriptures. That will be a reference Bible, you know, when I'm studying Yahuwah's word, but it's not going to be my main go-to. You know, so I prayed today that Yahuwah would use us as righteous vessels. And that you guys would receive the truth, or at least look into this. That would be my prayers, guys, to look into this stuff. Okay? Don't just stay with what you're comfortable with. Don't just be like, oh, this is too complicated. I just want to believe what I believe. And again, if a regurgitation in your mind from church comes from, well, the Bible should be a lot easier to understand. It should be so easy. A baby can understand it. That's not biblical either.
No, it isn't.
That's not a saying in the Bible. It's not a saying in the Bible. Even the good news, it never says that about the good news. So, you know, again, guys, like, we are supposed to be Bereans. We are supposed to look into things. We're not supposed to just blindly believe it because we like it, okay? Mm-hmm. Because it suits us and it's more suitable, okay? Because it's easier to believe, you know? And that's where a lot of this non-oneness comes from, is because really Unitarianism, you can look this up for yourself, but it came from counteracting the false belief of the Trinity. That's the only reason this non-oneness belief system came about. It was one error to counteract another error. And that's what the devil does. So, but anyway, go ahead, brother. I'll let you go and then we'll end.
I just wanted to correct myself. And I don't think I think it's like a completely different topic, so I don't think I'll go into it, but I did want to just correct. Exodus 15:3 in the Septuagint, apparently it doesn't even say that Yahuwah is a man of war. It actually reads completely opposite. It says Yahuwah brings wars to nothing. Yahuwah is his name. It's interesting.
Yeah, it could be the opposite, like concept that he ends wars, he brings them to nothing, kind of like a premillennial concept, you know, in Isaiah where it talks about he'll make them put their swords in plowshares.
Yeah.
Could be talking about that. Yeah, I don't
Yes.
think, and again, I'm not saying that you guys have to throw away the Masoretic. There's positives in the Masoretic too, like this one. So, not saying you got to throw away, but if you're basing it on one main manuscript, your theology, you will be in error in certain things if you're just trusting one version of the scriptures, because no version is perfect. Okay,
That's right.
we're at this point in time where Yahuwah has preserved his word enough for us to live by it, but he did not promise to perfectly preserve one version. And again, if you go back to the Second Temple time period, like we talked about earlier, they never had one version. They never had it like that. So the ancient Israelites even had 2 or 3 streams of manuscripts that they used in the temple. So why are we all of a sudden? Probably because we've been raised King James only and this only and Hallelujah Scriptures onlyism. Okay. Well, you got to understand is that we're farther down the line of telephone now than what they were back then. So why would we think there's a perfect copy or translation when back then they were using multiple manuscripts when they had the original Septuagint? Okay, when the original Septuagint was actually in the temple, okay, they still were using multiple manuscript flows or families. Okay, that's always been the case. You can look it up for yourself. They always had an Aramaic, Hebrew, and Greek text. That's the way it went. They always did, and they probably the Samaritan community, like I said, had their own too. So you technically had 4 in the Second Temple time period. So there was no reason that they felt like they had to just trust in one version. Okay, so that came about and didn't come about until like Christianity. That really didn't come about until the Baptist religion or whatever evangelical decide, okay, we got to only trust in the King James Bible.
Yeah.
Like somehow Yahuwah is only going to inspire one group of people to make a translation. I'm telling you, that's the tale. It's mythology. It's crazy. It's idolatry borderline, and it's mythology. They actually believe Yahuwah only inspired King Jimmy and his scribes to make a perfect Bible. That's the story. I'm not joking around. That's the story. Go ahead.
What I find interesting, though, because I remember this clearly, it was about 1977, and when we left that week, everything, all the King James Bibles were in the pews and everything. We walked back in the next week, and they had been replaced by NIVs, because the NIV had just come out, and it's kind of funny for something that they trusted so much that they were willing to just, flip it over. Interesting.
So anyway, brother, is that a new one, or do you need me to put your hand down? Okay. All right. So hopefully you guys got something out today. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Have a great week. Yahuwah willing, we'll see you guys next week. Shalom. All right. Off.